Well, I'm utterly delighted to introduce to you, if you don't already know him, Joe Cheal, who is a fantastic fellow who is a well. Are they game books, or do you like to call them something else? Have you got another name for them?
No, game books is absolutely fine. I kind of grew up in the realms of dungeon. When I say grew up in the realms of Dungeons and Dragons, that literally sounds like I've just transported into this world and done the whole D&D cartoon backwards. No, I played Dungeons and Dragons as a young kid in the kind of around 1980, 81, and it was in the pandemic that I just got nostalgic for old things, old times,
Oh,
and hence wrote the first as a kid back then. Just in, I don't know when you were at school whether you had like little French vocabulary books where you had to write in them and things like that. And
yeah.
I'd somehow got one of those from school and written a 100 section Dungeons and Dragons adventure back then. I don't know how I did it.
In French, was it, or is it in English?
I love the idea. That would have been very cool. But no, it was in. I can't even claim for it to be completely in English either because I was only about 11. But
So, which games books kind of caught your attention?
right, well, okay. In terms of what caught my attention, obviously way back then, there was when the Warlock of Firetop Mountain came out. That was pretty revolutionary and just created not just a kind of something to read and look at the pictures. It was like a genuine environment. It was like an experience that I'd only ever got from, even at that age, reading something like Lord of the Rings, where you eventually
Hmm.
just get pulled in and feel it's like a kinesthetic feeling as well that's associated with it. I also played the old Tunnels and Trolls, some of the
Uh,
early solo books and things like that. So it was, I love the idea of it. I just love the idea of it.
Brilliant. And so that you're obviously a role player. I don't know, maybe you weren't. Were you a role player as well? Did you get into Dungeons Dragons?
Yeah, so Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
was my thing at school. We played, so I played probably about for 4 years or something like that, 1980,
Yeah.
84, around there, and then played computer games, and Dungeons and Dragons just sat to one side. Got nostalgic for it again around the year 2000. I think that was when third edition came out. Then
Yeah.
sold the whole lot, and now look at the eBay and the prices. And just the what did I do?
I've got a third edition that I bought. Yeah, maybe I've got yours. All right. Yeah, it is good. Now, you obviously from 11 to, I'm not asking your age now, but there was quite a gap there from writing your
Yes.
first game book
Yeah.
idea to settling down and actually writing one. So you've got a series, and was it planned originally to be a trilogy, or maybe there are more? Tell me a little bit. Is it Maglanian? How do you pronounce it?
So Maglania is the name of the world, and
Mag-
so it's the Maglanian Chronicles. Um,
Ah, brilliant.
so that's cool. And what did it just sprang? I think because I just got back into the feel and the idea of it, I just started writing. Just started writing and mapping and doing a few maps, and then there was a town, and then there was a thing, and then there was a whole kind of concept behind it. So I just literally kind of I wrote itself in that sense,
Yeah.
which was rather nice. So I was kind of almost on the adventure whilst it was happening. Um, and I was really pleased. So the Shadowbound Lands, that was at the end of the pandemic that I wrote that, and I was genuinely, I had no idea what kind of reception I would get, and I know that I'm not, one of the big names, that I've not been around on the scene for long enough to be a
Yeah.
name in that sense, but I've been really pleased with the reaction and the yeah, kind of reviews and just conversations with people, which then inspired the book too. So even back then, I had an idea of a kind of very Dungeons and Dragonsy type world to start with. Then maybe sort of 1500 years later, so it would be our early Elizabethan Witcher type. If we start
Oh,
playing
okay.
games,
Yeah.
Witcher, Ravenloft was one of the Dungeons and Dragons kind of worlds. So that's the Oblivion Arty, and then this most recent one is based in a kind of Victorian era. So it's about sort of 400 years after the previous book.
Oh, wow.
And this is a Victorian horror in that what's happened. is, just in a nutshell, is an accidental time traveler from the Edwardian period, a lady called Edith Fink, who is actually my great great aunt, who was a musical
Ah,
comedian. Um, she goes back in time and generates this rift in realities, which then combines Maglanian, Victorian London, or bits of it, kind of drags these things through into a new realm,
yeah.
plus a third world that we don't really know much about, which is a very bizarre
Ooh.
place. But we don't learn too much about that. But it creates bigger issues than would have been there otherwise.
Oh wow, that sounds really thrilling, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be a trilogy. Then it sounds like you've got quite a few of these planned.
So originally it was a quadrilogy, with the four.
Yeah.
And the idea was then would have one set in the future, a science fiction one. I
Mm.
don't know whether I'll ever do a science fiction one or not, but the most recent one, The Cloistered Tears, that's a big book. It just got too big, kind of like, it's not too big. It's an open world. They're all open world. So and this particular one is so open world. It is. I know some people have kind of said, why bother doing a book when you could have a computer game, that would video game that would have all of this in. But I
Yeah.
love open world, the Skyrims, The Witcher.
Right.
I love those kind of games. So I wanted to put that into book form as much as near as possible. But what it has, The Cloistered Tears, but there's a precursor to prelude introduction called The Endless Asylum. So as the reader, you can read either, both, preferably not neither, but you can read both. So you could start with The Endless Asylum, which is quite a short one, 150 sections, where it
Yeah.
is the kind of a bit of a cliche, but waking up in the asylum, again, Victorian time, but everything's gone horribly distorted. A Silent Hill, I would say, as a franchise, that there's a bit of influences, particularly into The Endless Asylum. Then the end of that leads neatly into the beginning of The Cloistered Tears, which is about 850 sections. So the two books is about 1,000 sections and 150,000 words.
Oh,
So it's a big chunky book. Um,
wow.
to
And,
the I
and
think
and what's the game mechanic? Do you have anything that you've done for that, or is it just
yeah,
a choose your own? How does it work?
yeah. So obviously there's the choose your own, and you're following. There's well in the most recent book. So the Endless Asylum I've done as a rules light. So there is a little bit, a little bit of
Yeah.
combat. However, there's not loads and loads of stuff to write down. It's a fairly simple thing, which was almost like how do you engage someone in to playing and reading the into the Maglanian Chronicles.
Mm.
The Cloistered Tears has got a lot more. There's a combat structure to it, not to the level of Dungeons and Dragons. It is more nearer to the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, I would say. The couple of six-sided dice will do you the trick.
Yeah.
But you have a kind of psychological intelligence, that perception almost, where you can see things, and there's a lot of conversation happens. It's a very much a people-oriented one. My my background is psychology, so it's much more about the characters and the people within it, so that they are all quite different characters. And as you spend time with different characters and go on sub quests with different characters from it, you must get
Mm.
a feel and get to know those characters as well. So that's something that was very important to me. That it wasn't just let's go through a world and do some stuff. It's very much there's people in it. You're coming back to people to have conversations with them about things you've discovered, and
Yeah.
moving on moves the whole thing on. So there is in the writing of it, there was a complexity.
When you're sort of inhabiting those characters, you're writing them. Those voices, are you kind of, are they from you, or do you feel like they actually come alive a little bit, or you said there's a great grandmother that you
Yeah,
selected. Do you like choosing people from your own imagination, or someone that you've met before?
I think there's two answers to that, and the answer is yes. It's because some of them will just manifest. They'll kind of start to appear, and then their character develops as the thing goes on. There are a couple of other characters where I might take a fairly well-known actor stroke character, and then it
Yeah.
becomes my own version of that. So I'm sure it doesn't break any rules, but the in the Oblivionati, there's a shopkeeper who just, I was thinking of David Tennant.
Yeah.
David Tennant in that Doctor Who kind of eccentric kind of thing. And then you will also see in the Cloistered Tears, there is a bit of a Tom Baker character. And I know you're familiar with Tom.
I am indeed, yes. Yes.
Yes,
Is
very
it?
good, Jelly Baby. Um,
But
why
it isn't. Do you find yourself talking as the characters as you're writing as well, and saying the lines out loud? Do you?
well, sort of. I think they run in my head, but again, I do find that the different characters they do somewhat take on a life of their own. I don't know what that says about me psychologically, but therefore, what's beautiful about that is that the kind of the script part of it, the actual conversations almost write themselves because it's their
Hmm.
persona comes into it. In the Oblivionati, probably one of my favorite characters is Sapphire Sky, who's a bard but very sassy female character. But and it's just there's just something about her humor and partly Edith as well. Edith Finke, the other one, their humor just comes through by itself. It's
Yeah.
they're sometimes sarcastic, but always loving. It's always a kind of like a you kind of want to spend time. I'd love to spend time with both of them.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's you. It is weird, isn't it? How you can disassociate yourself from your character to and it does become its own thing. And you can imagine this is why I say it's very hard to kind of suddenly stop because you want those stories and those characters, and you want to revisit them in different
Yes.
books.
And just so you know, in terms of next steps, plans, the next book, which I may take a year out because I've got some business books I need to write.
Hmm.
But then there's the Final Breath, which will be a sequel to the Oblivionati because I wanted to bring Sapphire Sky back, so it's an adventure kind of alongside her.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
yeah, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? You've got the character, and you kind of go, "Oh, I want to know more about them, and I want to kind of revisit that." So it's like, "Oh, I'm the author. Oh, okay, I can do that."
Yes, there's no one here to stop me.
Just people on Facebook going, "Boo!" That's all.
Yeah. And do you want to now you're kind of getting into this role playing and game book? Would you fancy turning it into actually a role playing game? Can you see it?
It could do. At the same time, for me personally, if just sitting here on my own, I haven't got the. I'm not brilliant. In all honesty, after 30 plus years of running my own business, I'm not brilliant at marketing things. And I know this is kind of like not what this interview is about, but I admire you massively because I'm often
Oh,
seeing your name and like Amazon and all this kind of stuff. And I just think that is absolutely fantastic. So the reality is, yes, it could potentially become. I mean, there's plenty of the other thing I love is creating new creatures,
hmm.
and hence the Cloistered Tears also has an explorer's guidebook, which you buy separately. I'm going to try and keep that as cost effective as possible, so that it's not
Yeah,
a drain. But the idea is there's a bestiary in it of some of the weird and wonderful creatures that one discovers. But yeah, that always used to be my thing. I always used to like coming up with the monsters as well. Why use someone else's monsters when you could create your own?
yeah. Oh, fantastic. Now, obviously, we got plans there. How can people kind of follow your progress? Do you have a website, or do you prefer them to contact you in different ways, or find your books in a certain pattern or method?
Sure. The books themselves, obviously, the first two are on any good bookshop.
Yeah,
But on Facebook, I've got Imaginarium Game Books group, which is a good place to start because that'll give you the news, the updates, plus the what's come, what's been in the past, plus some. I must mention in terms of illustrators as well, because I do like to have
oh
these
yes.
things illustrated. In the first book, because I didn't know at that time, I'd not really hadn't got to know the community at that point. I used old photographs and things like that I'd taken and used in Dungeons and Dragons over the years, and kind of worked them through some software. In the second and third, and then the Endless Asylum, Huago, who's one of the most extraordinary illustrators,
Yeah,
just
fantastic.
utterly wonderful and such a lovely working with him in partnership is just an utter joy as well. And there's Michael Shepherd has done a couple of illustrations as well. So it's and then yeah, so it's but my main relationship has been with Huago. So I think that just really lifts the whole thing. Even just flicking through the book, even if you haven't, you get the book to start with. I always love this with a game book when you buy it, and before you even start reading it, you just flick through it, and the illustrations make you go, "Oh, I want to read this."
Yeah. So, but have you thought about going back to your first one and maybe re-illustrating it? No,
Possibly.
Get it. Yeah.
I was chatting to some other authors at a year or so ago. The books will never, I doubt the books will ever make a profit, i.e. their money back, because of the amount I've spent or kind of invested in the illustrations is way more, I think, than. But I just thought, well, look, it's kind of, it's not my main job. My main job is consultancy. So therefore it is a hobby, and well, if you can't spend a few shillings on your hobby, then
absolutely. There's you could buy a motorbike, fast car, etc., or you could leave a legacy behind you. Which would you prefer?
And I genuinely love the idea of when people read it and they get a good buzz from it, and if through any of those books, if people get a feel of it, if get that kinesthetic, they get like they're in that world, and it's dragged them in some way, shape, or form, then job done.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, it's been an absolute delight to meet you and chat with you. I'm really excited to see what you do in the next few years. I'm not wishing another pandemic, but I hope you can find the time to write a load more. But for the moment, thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.